Happy New Year. Hello and welcome to ExpertSpeak right here on Pan-African Television. I'm your host, Victoria Wilson, and we are starting the year with clarity, conviction, and no apologies. This edition of the show takes us beyond our continent to a struggle that speaks directly to Africans' own history and presents the escalating U.S. aggression against Venezuela. What is unfolding there is not isolated, and it is not accidental. It is a reminder that imperialism is alive, evolving, and increasingly aggressive. Tonight, we examine what is happening, why it matters, and what it tells us about the global order we are living under. Stay with us today as we bring you up to speed with our spotlight with Daniel Otu Asante.
It's been 3 weeks since the United States violated various international laws by attacking Venezuela and kidnapping the democratically elected president Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores. The attack, which saw the U.S. bombing Caracas and other regions, led to over 100 deaths. It was aimed at not just Venezuela, but the idea of sovereignty itself, and the reverberation has been felt worldwide, including our continent. This is a spotlight segment on ExpertSpeak, and today we'll take a look at what happened and the questions that have emerged from these attacks. People across the world are familiar with US-led backed operations that have destroyed countries so as to steal their natural resources. Venezuela is only the latest example of such attacks that have destroyed countries such as Iraq, Libya, and Syria. While the US claimed that Maduro was being arrested for narco-terrorism-related charges, President Donald Trump made it clear that the real target was oil. In these weeks since the attack, the US has sought to exert its direct control over Venezuelan oil. The US attack was also aimed at destabilizing the Bolivarian Revolution, which has offered an alternative to countries of Latin America. Under Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela used its resources to benefit the poor, hungry, and illiterate, making rapid gains in a short time. The Bolivarian project built communes and other popular initiatives that propelled the people to be ones who decided their destiny. Venezuela and Cuba worked together to keep the flag of the regional integration flying strong, which was a direct challenge to the US politics. Venezuela's close relationship with Russia and China was another reason for the US attack. In response to the attack, Venezuela has solidly mobilized in support of the Bolivarian Revolution. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez assumed office as interim president and along with other key members of Maduro's cabinet have managed to ensure calm and social cohesion. Despite the brutal attacks, tens of thousands of people from all walks of life have mobilized against the US attack in support of President Maduro. The people of Venezuela have made it clear that they will not surrender their sovereignty in the face of imperialist pressure. President Maduro and First Lady Flores, who are in New York prisons, have led resistance, refusing to bow down before the imperialist institutions. Maduro has said he continues to be the president of Venezuela and has declared himself a prisoner of war, a sentiment that is reflected on the streets of Caracas and across the country. We in Africa have a long history of solidarity and fraternity with Latin America. Cuba itself, strangled by over 6 decades of US blockade, sent its people to fight alongside African freedom fighters. Hugo Chavez extended solidarity to African nations and envisaged a unified global South. The Bolivarian Revolution drew from the same breath as revolutionary Pan-Africanism, the conviction that the wretched of the earth must unite and build a common, prosperous, and dignified future. We are also familiar with the design of imperialist forces led by the United States, which have sought to loot our resources and destroy our countries. The attack on Venezuela's sovereignty is an attack on all of us across Africa. Trade unions, political parties, and social movements have risen in outrage. They have demanded the return of President Maduro and First Lady Flores and the safeguarding of Venezuelan sovereignty. Across Africa, people have demanded that their government step up at this moment of imperial assault and take a stand in solidarity with Venezuela. At this moment of imperial assault, the fundamental question before the people of Africa and the global south remains protection of our sovereignty and right. We cannot be dictated to, and we will not be threatened or bullied to surrender what is ours. This struggle continues and will continue as long as imperialism threatens our independence. I'm Danny Ochiwe-Sante, and this has been the Spotlight segment on Africa Speaks. Stay tuned as we explore various aspects of the attacks on Venezuela and the response from Africa and the rest of the world.
Alright, you're still watching Africa Speaks right on Pan-African television. Thank you very much, Daniel Ochiwe-Sante, for that insight. And now to help us understand the forces behind the attack on Venezuela, we are joined by Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. of the Socialist Movement of Ghana to help us unpack the situation in Venezuela and why Africa should see this as a fight for all and not just for the people of Venezuela. Welcome, Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. to the show. So we've been talking about, the aggression that the U.S. launched on Venezuela. That was on the 3rd of January, 2026, the beginning of this year. So tell us, the U.S. bombing on Venezuela and the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro and the wife, what does it say about violating the sovereignty of a country? And what does this moment reveal about U.S. imperialism and why Africans should take this on as also their fight and not just the fight against the people of Venezuela?
Well, this is not an entirely new story. This is an old story, centuries old story. I mean, the forces of imperialism have all over the years been grabbing land, been dictating who should govern us, and so on. And there's a continuation of that empire building. There's a continuation of that exploitation, the stealing and exploitation of the resources of the peoples of the world. Look, some time ago, I mean, they actually captured us as beasts of burden and made us work as their property, and so on. Then we came to the era of classical colonialism, and we cannot forget, I mean, 1844, when the European leaders met in Berlin under the leadership of von Bismarck and carved out Africa into their spheres of influence and so on. And the same thing happened in Asia, same thing happened in North and South America and so on. And what Donald Trump is doing is a continuation of that.
Right.
The forces of imperialism, the capitalists who rule the United States of America and so on, want to steal the resources of Venezuela. And what they did was just part of the effort of stealing the resources of Venezuela and trying to decide what Venezuela should become or should not become. And this is highly condemnable. In 2026, I mean, one would have thought that we have moved away from the ethos of the 1800s and the 1900s, and come into a new situation where national sovereignty will be respected. Unfortunately, what has happened emphasizes the fact that, there's no decency. Thieves would always have their way.
Right, thank you very much. You know that this attack violates the host of international laws and then the UN Charter's core principles, yet nothing has been done with regards to that. So how do you see the collapse of, international laws when it comes to the US?
Well, the US has never respected international law. I mean, when the US joined other Western countries and used their security services to overthrow and assassinate Patrice Lumumba, they were not respecting international law.
Right.
When they actually staged a coup in Chile and killed Salvador Allende, they were not respecting international law. When the CIA overthrew Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana in 1966, they were not respecting international law. When the United States of America supported the apartheid regime in South Africa, they were not supporting international law. So they've never been respecters of international law. They've always violated international law. Perhaps what is significant this time in the case of Venezuela is that this is brazenly done.
Yeah.
It's done in our faces. And that is what, makes a difference. But they've never respected international law.
Right. Talking about the fact that this one was done in our faces, you know that Donald Trump made it clear that it was because of the oil in Venezuela. That is why they, launched this particular attack or made this particular move. How does this mirrors, the sovereignty of Africa, and then the fact that they came in here and plundered the resources of Africa? How does the situation in Venezuela mirrors Africa's own?
Well, a lot of people think that this is a new phenomenon, this is a Trump phenomenon and so on. It is not. If you read the Cheney report of 2001, it is clear that the U.S. policy is to grab all energy resources around the world, and that if need be, it was going to use, force in order to be able to grab these resources. So this is a philosophy, this is a policy which has been in existence for a very long time. The Cheney report, which was released in 2001, makes that very, very clear. Okay. Again, I repeat, what makes this so annoying, so repulsive and so on, is simply the fact that this is done in our face. This is brazen. They are not trying to cover it up and so on. Now, this should be a signal to the rest of the world that imperialism is getting more and more desperate. And there's a reason why imperialism is getting more and more desperate. If you take Britain, for example, it's running an inflation rate of about 32%. If you take the US, the only reason why the dollar has any strength is the petrodollar agreement it reached with Saudi Arabia, is the fact that the U.S. currency is still the currency of choice when it comes to trading in oil and so on. Without that, the U.S. dollar is just a piece of paper. You understand? So the U.S. is in crisis.
Right.
The U.S. very soon will not be able to export its inflation, which it does because its currency is the currency of choice for international trade. If you look at infrastructure in the United States of America, it is crumbling. The underground railway system is in shambles. Its bridges are old, need doing. Can you explain why on the streets of Washington, the streets of New York, the streets of Philadelphia and so on, there are so many homeless people who do not have access to jobs, who cannot feed themselves, the homeless people and so on? Capitalism is in crisis and imperialist states are panicking.
Right. And
they will do anything in order to steal other people's resources to solve their own problems. Look, within the last 3 weeks, the U.S. has sold up to $500 million of seized Venezuelan oil. Not 1 cent has gone to the people of Venezuela. This is outright theft. You're talking $500 million. Right. You know what $500 million would do to the economy of Venezuela? You understand? So this is because imperialism is in crisis. This is because capitalism has not been able to deliver, as it promised to deliver and so on. And it will continue. They will continue to grab resources from everywhere. Now the U.S. is not just focusing attention on Venezuela. Donald Trump has said quite publicly that he wants Canada as the 52nd Street of the U.S. Donald Trump is threatening to send Marco Rubio to Cuba as president of Cuba. He's threatening Mexico, he's threatening Colombia. He's even threatening to annex Greenland, which is already part of NATO, You understand? So imperialism is gone mad. It's collapsing, it's gone mad, it's become more reckless, and perhaps that's very good reason for us to begin to look at the world situation very, very closely and to begin to take sensible steps in order to be able to defend ourselves against this aggression.
Right. So let's stay on imperialism being in crisis. Just as you were saying, just as imperialism is in crisis and at the brink of falling or collapsing, as you have rightly put it, you know that the U.S. powers or the imperialist powers have targeted Africa and Latin America for resources to salvage their broken empires or their collapsing empires. But however, there's been resistance. For example, this includes the Cuba's role in defeating apartheid forces and the Chavez vision of United Global South. So could you tell us more about Venezuela's also role in this global resistance under the Bolivarian Revolution?
Well, as a matter of fact, the U.S. security services, that includes its armed forces and so on, has never been able to win a war, you know, throughout history. They've not won any war throughout history. I mean, they were walloped in Vietnam. They left Afghanistan in a haste. After killing 2 million people in Iraq, they could not achieve the objectives, you know. They recently attacked Iran and they had to run back, you know, pleading for a ceasefire and so on. So the U.S. security service is not that strong, you know, and it's beginning to flex its muscle again as a form of intimidation. There's a bully, you know, there's a very weak bully trying to intimidate, you know, the rest of the world. Now, it is significant to note that countries like Cuba have played a significant role in holding back the aggression of U.S. imperialism.
Right.
In the Battle of Cuito Carnaval in Angola, the proxies of the U.S., the apartheid armed forces, was defeated. It was completely surrounded. It was forced into negotiations, leading to the consolidation of the independence of Angola, independence for Namibia, and the overthrow of the apartheid regime in South Africa. The Cuban internationalist forces defeated, you know, the forces of imperialism there. Cuba has continued to be a very strong supporter of the national liberation movements across the world. It continues to support, you know, the Polisario Front and so on. And so is Venezuela, especially under Chavez. You know, this solidarity of anti-imperialist forces, this South-South solidarity which was advocated by Chavez and so on, frightens imperialism and pushes imperialism to become more and more desperate. But it cannot win against the forces of progress. It cannot win against, you know, the forces of liberation. You know, it will be defeated in the final analysis.
Right. So how do you see the governments across the continent, across the world, responding to this particular aggression of the U.S. to the people of Venezuela? What kind of action have governments taken, and what do you think are some actions that other governments can take, especially in our African continent or in the world, to, you know, speak against U.S. and its imperialism?
Well, I think that this is still an evolving process, you know. But one thing is clear: governments around the world, including members of NATO, including Western European countries, including African countries and so on, who have spoken on this matter, have all come to the conclusion that this is a blatant violation of international law. So there's unanimity on that. I mean, forget people like, you know, Macron and so on, who claim that Maduro's government was illegitimate, you know. But even as they claim that the government was illegitimate, they still appreciate the fact that this is a blatant violation of international law who should not be countenanced. You see, this regime of rules and laws and so on was not established by us. In 1945, when the UN and its agencies were being established, Africa was not at the table. The vast majority of African countries, South American countries and so on, did not. Cuba was not an independent country, as it were, you understand. We were not at the table. So these were rules which were set, you know, by the imperialist powers themselves, you know. These were rules which they built ostensibly to protect their interests. Now, they've had their backs to the wall, and their rules are tightening them and so on. They're trying to break out of it, and they're kicking against everything. You know, like a bull in a china shop. Donald Trump is kicking everything in his way, kicking everything that he can see and so on. But this, unfortunately, will not bring success to Donald Trump and to the forces that he represents. And what is important is the fact that we who are victims of this reckless violation of international law, we who are victims of the rampaging beasts, of imperialism and so on, have a duty to work together, to continue to solidarize,
right,
to pool our resources together in this existential battle of survival.
So apart from what governments are doing, or what other, heads of states would do, or other countries would do in support of Venezuela, what is the role of the people's movement? What should they do? How do we rally around to support the people of Venezuela against U.S. imperialism?
Look, for us in the socialist movement of Ghana, solidarity with Venezuela is not an external thing. It's an integral part of our work. So every day when we wake up, whatever we do is incorporated in our work. And it's not just struggle, it's not just solidarity with Venezuela, it's solidarity with Cuba, solidarity with Greenland, solidarity with the Saudi Arab Democratic Republic, solidarity with Iran. It's all part of our integral world. It's important also to understand clearly that one of the tools of imperialism is information, or disinformation, if you like. And we have a responsibility to use the media that we have access to tell the truth, to paint the true picture, to dismantle this horrendous, propaganda, against the legitimate causes of the masses of the world. So that's part of our responsibility. To tell the true story of imperialist aggression and to design tools which enables us to protect national sovereignty.
Right. Thank you very much. So finally, can you tell us, in the face of all that is happening, in the heat of all that is happening, and the fact that U.S. imperialism is on the rise, and since it is nearing collapsing, it is trying to pull all along and then, drag us all to collapse with them, which we are standing for it not to happen. What do you have to say? What do you have to say in your final words to us, and how we can stand solidly without, conforming to U.S. imperialism and all its forms of aggression that they might launch on the continent?
Well, U.S. imperialism is gone crazy. Completely crazy. It's not on the rise. It's gone completely crazy. And as I said, it's kicking everything it can find, whether it's in this part or wherever. Anything you can find, it's kicking against it and upsetting the world order.
Yes.
You understand? Now, what is it that we can do? We've discussed that already. I think that no matter what it does, it will crumble.
Yes.
Okay? The forces of production and distribution have reached such a state of maturation that they can no longer continue to work within this paradigm. It is not possible to continue this vicious exploitation of the peoples of the world. And the time has come for the masses of the world, for the working people of the world to wake up and kick this atrocious system of oppression and exploitation. Mind you, a lot of times we talk in terms of the US versus others and so on. I think it's far more complex than that, because within the US itself, there are struggles of working people against the oligarchy, which rules the United States of America. For example, if you take the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and the bombing of Venezuela, within 24 hours of this action, there were demonstrations in 75 states in the United States of America. So it is not the U.S. versus Venezuela.
Yes.
It's the ruling elite of the U.S. trying to suppress the working people of the U.S. and trying to suppress the working people all over the world. You understand?
Exactly.
I mean, as we speak, there are mass demonstrations against the atrocities which are being committed by U.S. forces against innocent citizens. As we speak, there is the huge discrimination against the Chicanos, the Latinos, the Indians, and the African populations of the United States of America. The Ku Klux Klan continues to be active, and so on, in the United States of America. So when we talk about the unity of oppressed people and so on, we're also talking about the unity of people in the United States of America who are
Right.
victims
Sure.
of this oligarchy.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr., for this insight. Imperialism is in crisis, and therefore it would definitely crumble. This has been a discussion around the U.S. aggression on Venezuela, and we've been speaking to the General Secretary of the Socialist Movement of Ghana, Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. Thank you, Comrade Kwesi Pratt, for bringing us up to speed of the nuances around the issue in Venezuela. Those analyses matter, but so do the voices of struggle and solidarity. Coming up next is Voices on the Ground, where movements and comrades speak for themselves. This week we hear from our comrades across the continent as they connect Venezuela's resistance to broader working class and pan-African struggles against imperial domination. This is internationalism in practice.
What happened in Venezuela with the abduction of President Maduro and his wife is not new. It's not new to Africa. We saw it in 1961 with Patrice Lumumba. He was painfully humiliated, killed, and his body melted in sulfuric acid. We have seen it with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, killed in cold blood. We also saw it in Iraq with Saddam Hussein. It was seen with Allende, the way they killed Allende. They did the same in Grenada. It is a practice of the Americans. Their sense of humanity is zero. They have no respect for the humanity of others. The only humanity that matters is that of Americans. And they are starting to treat even their European partners in the same way with no respect. You can see the pomposity, the arrogance. But the world cannot be ruled this way. The world cannot be governed this way. This system is not sustainable. The people of the world will rebel against this. The people of the world will resist this. This is not the way to govern the world. But we expect this. American capitalism is in crisis. It's in a crisis in so many aspects. And the more it's troubled, the more brutal it becomes, the more criminal it becomes. I'm saying criminal because what happened in Venezuela was a criminal act. The pretext of drugs they were laying against President Maduro is ridiculous, even according to their own systems. There is nothing in America that showed President Maduro being linked to what they were accusing him of. What is there is the oil for Venezuela. What is there is hegemony over Latin America. But you cannot commit such heinous crimes. You cannot mistreat human beings in that way just to maintain your superiority, to maintain your hegemony, to demonstrate or project your power. Yes, America is powerful militarily. They have invested everything. They have created a killing machine that is beyond compare, that is beyond match. But again, humanity cannot be governed this way. Humanity cannot be led in this way. We will resist with everything possible. We will oppose what is going on because a better world is possible. But it's only possible if we struggle for it. A more humane world can be created out of this. And we have a duty to struggle for that humane world.
The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa expresses solidarity with Venezuela. We do this because we are deeply concerned about what's been happening. The fact that right now we're dealing with the situation where the American president, Donald Trump, has kidnapped the president of Venezuela and also kidnapped the wife and also invaded the country militarily. This is a complete violation of international law. As a union, we're deeply concerned that if Trump is allowed to get away with what he's done in Venezuela, that this can happen anywhere else in the world. Why we have concerns about this is because of the fact that the justification which was used for the unlawful military takeover of Venezuela was based on a lie that President Nicolas Maduro was running a global drug trafficking ring. And it was on that basis that Donald Trump justified the unlawful military takeover of Venezuela and its oil resources. He has even declared himself acting president of Venezuela on Truth Social. Now, that should concern us as South Africans, because currently, according to the United States government, South Africa is responsible for a white genocide. South Africa has been murdering white Afrikaner farmers. This is not true. There is absolutely no evidence to back this up. Yes, South Africa has a very high crime rate, but South Africa is not involved in any way in a white genocide. And that lie has been promoted by the American government, and it's already having a negative impact on us as a country. On top of that, why this is an important matter for South Africa is because of the tariffs that Trump has imposed on us. He's imposed 30% tariffs, and this is having a direct effect on NUMSA members in the auto sector. So as a union, we have a direct interest in this on the basis of how this affects members, but also as an internationalist, socialist-inspired union, NUMSA has an interest on the basis that we always take up campaigns in defense of sovereignty, in defense of independence, and more importantly, in defense of socialism. NUMSA has a long history of defending countries like Cuba, countries like Venezuela, countries like Brazil against any kind of interference. And of course, we are completely against imperialism. And if you see what happened in Nigeria, again, this is another reason why the African continent should be concerned, because of what Trump is doing. So the long and the short of it, in support and in solidarity with Venezuela, NUMSA will be marching to the American consulate in Sandton in Johannesburg on Saturday. This march will be about us putting a spotlight on what happened in Venezuela, and it will be a way for the union to highlight some of these issues that I've raised about the threat of modern imperialism in the United States under Donald Trump.
And now let's turn home to the continent with dispatches. First, we bring you updates from Mviwata's annual general meeting last year, where small-scale farmers in Tanzania organized against corporate control of food systems. Then we turn to Guinea-Bissau, where recent developments once again raise questions about sovereignty, instability, and external influence. These stories remind us that imperialism do not operate in one place at a time. It moves across the region, adapting its methods, but keeping the same objective: control.
Inajishughulisha kwenye mikoa hiyo yote. Kwa upande wa mkoa wa Morogoro, Mviwata inafanya kazi moja kwa moja na huyu mkulima. Kitu cha kwanza, huwa kunakuwa na miradi mbalimbali, kwa sababu ndani ya chombo chetu cha Mviwata tuna wafadhili ambao wao wanajitokeza kwa ajili ya kutusapoti hiki chombo chetu, kukisapoti hiki chombo chetu sisi kama wakulima wadogo, ili baadhi ya majukumu yaweze kusonga mbele. Kama nilivyosema kwamba lengo la kukusanyika kwa pamoja ni kutengeneza nguvu ya pamoja na kujengeana uwezo. Kwa maana hiyo sasa, Mviwata hii ambayo ni taasisi huwa inafanya majukumu yafuatayo. Cha kwanza, inahakikisha kwamba mkoa wa Morogoro unafanya mkutano wake ule wa ngazi ya kati, ambayo ni mkoa wa Morogoro unafanya mkutano wake kwa mwaka mara moja, wakulima wanakutana. Hapa tumeona kwenye mkutano wa kitaifa tunakutana mikoa tofauti tofauti, lakini kwenye huu mkutano wa Morogoro tunakutana wilaya tofauti tofauti ndani ya huo mkoa. Tunakutana, tunajadili mambo yetu sisi kama wakulima wadogo. Kwa hiyo mkutano huu unafanyika kwa mwaka mara moja na wenyewe pia. Lakini pia sasa ndani ya hiyo mikutano na kwenyewe pia tunafanya maazimio yetu. Tutafanya tathmini kujiona wapi tuliko kuwepo, tulikotoka, tuliko kuwepo na tunako kwenda. Kwa hiyo huwa tunafanya tathmini pia, tunajitathmini kwamba nini kifanyike katika hizo shughuli zetu. Lakini ndani ya hayo huwa kunakuwa na mikutano, tuseme kama vile matamasha mbalimbali ya wanawake yanafanyika, kwa mfano siku ya wanawake duniani, basi MVIWATA inajihusisha hapo kusapoti, kuona namna gani hawa wanawake wanafanya hii, wanakamilisha huu mkutano wao wa wanawake. Ndani ya mkutano wa wanawake kuna mambo mbalimbali tunajadili sisi kama wanawake. Mle wanawake kuna mambo mengi ambayo wanajihusisha, kuna mambo ya ugandamizaji, yani mambo ya ukatili. Tunaona ni namna gani mwanamke hapewi haki zake za msingi. Kwa hiyo huwa tunapata nafasi kwenye hiyo mikutano yetu kujadili mambo muhimu kama hayo sisi kama wanawake. Na ninaweza kusema kwamba kupitia hiyo mikutano au hayo matamasha, wanawake tumeweza kuwa vizuri kwa sasa hivi. Mimi najitambua kama Odilia kwamba napaswa kusimama kwenye nafasi yangu, mimi kama mama, mimi kama mwanamke. Kwa hiyo hayo tunayapata, lakini ndani ya hayo matamasha tunapata pia fursa hata ya kujua afya zetu sisi kama wanawake. Huwa tunasumbuliwa na kansa ile ya kizazi, shingo ya kizazi. Kwa hiyo wanakuja wataalamu, tunaweza kucheki afya zetu, kuona namna gani kama mtu afya yake imedhoofika, basi aweze kupata matibabu mapema ili aweze kuimarika, ili aweze kuendelea na shughuli zake. Mambo haya yote taasisi ya MVIWATA inashughulika nayo, kuona kwamba mwanamke anaweza kufanya mambo yake na kujua haki zake za msingi.
MVIWATA tangu imeanzishwa imekuwa ikifanya harakati za mapambano dhidi ya wakulima wadogo. Na mimi baada ya kuwa nimejiunga, nimeona mafanikio makubwa zaidi ndani ya MVIWATA, kwani wakulima wengi wamekuwa wakiamini MVIWATA kama kimbilio lao na ndio suluhisho la utatuzi wa migogoro au changamoto mbalimbali. Lakini pia MVIWATA kwa sababu haijajikita tu moja kwa moja kwenye swala zima la kilimo, lakini pia imekuwa ikijihusisha katika masuala mazima ya kuwapa watu elimu kwenye nyanja za kisiasa, kiuchumi na masuala mazima ya kijamii. Na nikiitazama MVIWATA ya leo na watu jinsi wanavyozidi kuiamini kuwa kama kimbilio, hasa wakulima wadogo, ninaiona MVIWATA inakwenda kuwa suluhisho la matatizo ya wakulima huko mbele, na mwisho wa siku wakulima watakuwa washindi katika mapambano yanayotokea kama changamoto za shughuli zao zinazokwamisha, hasa kwenye maamuzi ya soko, maamuzi ya umiliki wa mbegu na vitu vya namna hiyo ambavyo vitapelekea, yani naamini kwamba MVIWATA inakwenda kuwa suluhisho na inakwenda kuwapa ushindi wakulima na kwa ajili ya kumiliki nyanja zote za kiuchumi, na maamuzi yale ya kisera yanayotolewa na serikali sasa yatakuwa mikononi mwa wakulima wenyewe.
Thank you for the opportunity to explain to all the viewers what is going on with Pan-Africanism at the level of the homeland of Amir Cabral, Guinea-Bissau. As you know, Amir Cabral is one of the greatest Pan-Africanists, along with Assadji for Kwame Nkrumah and others. But it's very interesting for us, and we should be involved, because the PIGC, the African Party of Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, is a Pan-Africanist revolutionist socialist party that organized a mass armed struggle and defeated not only the Portuguese colonialists, but NATO backers, US and all those other scum imperialists. And on a regular basis, imperialism does their best to destabilize us and bring about coup d'etats. But fortunately for us, even though the coup d'etats have happened to us more than 3 times, we always come back because we're based upon the culture of the mass of our people. Recently, in November, there were elections scheduled, legislative and presidential elections, and the PIGC was barred by this kangaroo Supreme Court that was put into place by the neo-colonial agent Umaro Sissoko Embalo. And so when they barred the PhD as well as our president from contesting the presidential elections, we had to make a choice. Either we should try to just bring the whole place down or decide to join forces with another candidate that had already been approved. We decided to do that. And it was that force between the PIGC supporting Fernando Diaz da Costa with the PIGC president, Domingos Simões Pereira, serving as the kind of like the person who sponsored him, saying that since you want to vote for me and I can't run, you vote for Fernando Diaz da Costa. They worked so very hard with really no money against the neo-colonialists, had almost endless supply of money. Hundreds of new cars, motorcycles, all the posters, banners, T-shirts, giving money in the villages, etc. And they're the ones who organized the elections. But because of the mass support, we won the elections. But what happened was, in Guinea-Bissau, when you go to the voting table, the votes are counted there, where all the public can testify to the counting of the vote until they're published at each voting table. You have about 4,000 voting tables. When they're sent to the regional electoral commissions, they're compiled. And it's at this point that the military tried to interfere. I can't say military, I should say the militia, because there's a private militia that worked for the former neo-colonial puppet Umar Sissoco Kambala. They tried to interfere, and at least 4 of the 9 regions, it was very violent, huh? But our people stood the ground and made sure that they published the results. And fortunate for us, when the results were published, they were given to the regional governors, to the judicial police, to the public prosecutors, as well as to the international observers. So we have international observers from ECOWAS, from the African Union, from the UN, from a number of international organizations who have these results. But the day before they were to be announced on the national level, on the 26th of November, some armed militia stormed into the National Electoral Council, destroyed a lot of equipment, arrested some of the electoral authorities. They also they kidnapped the president of the PIC party, Domingos Simões Pereira, who's also the president of the National People's Assembly. They tried to kidnap the president-elect, Fernando Diaz da Costa, but he was able to get away because of the force that those who were around used against those who came to get him. And so as I'm speaking to you right now, he's in the Nigerian embassy here in Bissau as a refugee. But Domingos Simões Pereira is still in the jail after more than 53 days. No charges brought against him, but treated like a prison. He's kidnapped. So as act continua, what they decided to do was to implant what they called a high command, a military force, and created their own, what they call National Council for Transition, to replace the elected National People's Assembly, and to create another little piece of paper. They call it a new constitution that they say is their juridical framework. And they're still repressing our people. Every time you try to have a manifestation, they shoot us up with tear gas, they arrest our people, they beat our people. And even yesterday, the 20th of January, which is National Heroes Day, marking the 53rd anniversary of the assassination of Amilcar Cabral, or should I say the physical disappearance of Amilcar Cabral, they wouldn't even allow us to go into the mausoleum where Amilcar Cabral lays at rest. Can you imagine that in Ghana? Not being able to go into the Kwame Nkrumah mausoleum, troops stop you from going there. We also have a statue by the airport. We couldn't go to the statue, an outside statue. They had police surrounding there, so we couldn't even put our wreaths in honor of Amilcar Cabral. Even his family, his daughter could not go visit her father. So the situation is that the military regime still occupies the PH's national headquarters. The national headquarters are regional headquarters for Bissau. They also occupy another headquarters of the Party for Social Renovation, the PRS party, the party that joined forces with the PIGC. So as Pan-Africanists, we must be very involved. As you know, we cannot depend on ECOWAS, even though we're part of the ECOWAS community. Of course, the ECOWAS heads of state, they met an emergency meeting right after the coup against us and made a lot of strong statements. Yeah, they want to tolerate it. You have to announce the election results. You have to release those who are in prison, And then they had another meeting on the 14th of December. They kind of started backpedaling a little bit about announcing the results, saying, oh, well, if we try to announce the results, that can cause more confusion, can lead to a war. Oh, that's not true. The results have already been counted. They've been published on all the regional electoral commissions. And Goodluck Jonathan, who was one of the observers, has them. Melvin Snow, the president of the ECOWAS Parliament Subcommittee for Security Missions. He asked them, and he offered to give them to all of the deputies, all the members of the Parliament of the West African Parliament, and Filipe Nyusi, the former president of Mozambique, who came here as an observer for the African Union, also has such results, among others. But these are the ones who had enough courage to say publicly several times, we have the results. But in the meantime, we don't really see the effects of the demands made by ECOWAS. It's the same situation. They're still beating our people. They're still arresting. Sometimes they even go to your house and drag you out and beat you, just like they did last week. They went to the house of one of the members of parliament. Before that, one of our members of parliament, who's a part of the West African Parliament, Marciano D, went to the airport in Bissau to get on a plane to go to Abuja, Nigeria, to participate in the West African Parliament. They kidnapped him from the airport, threw him in jail as well. So we'd like to make our appeal to all of you who are serious about Pan-Africanism to understand that the only way you can get Pan-Africanism is by the people having a party that controls Africa. And that party has to be a mass party where the people themselves can make their decisions from the conception and implement the decisions they make. And to do that, you have to take power in these microstates. First step. Second step, you have to bring these different microstates together. You have to say you have the microstate of Ghana, has to come go to the microstate of Guinea-Bissau, the microstate of Guinea-Bissau, etc. Well, that's the path we're on. As you know, the PIDC brought together the microstate of Guinea-Bissau and the microstate of Cape Verde, which is closer to Dakar, Senegal than it is to Guinea-Bissau. And we were joining forces with Guinea County before the coup happened here and the coup happened there and this other coup. But we're still going on that same path. You have to have state power controlled by a revolutionary mass Pan-Africanist party. In order to do that, we have to make sure that you see the people they have really embraced the PIGs here. The only time we lost the election was when we had a war back in 1998-99. A lot of people blame that on PIGC, but ever since then, we win every election. But then they do a coup against us. But we're strong enough to come back. Some people say, every time you win power, you get kicked out. No, that's not the issue. The issue is we have enough power to come back. And we're going to come back from this one. But we'd like to make our appeal to you. Get in contact with those who are part of ECOWAS, the president of Ghana, the president of Sierra Leone, the president of Liberia, etc. Get in contact with the West African parliamentarians. Get in contact with anybody you can and help in any and every way you can to make sure that the election results are issued and that those who are in prison are free from prison and that we're able to have development.
And that brings us to a word of the day today. This week's word is hyper-imperialism, not the imperialism of the past, but an intensified system that combines economic warfare, military pressure, information control, and political manipulation all at once. It is the framework through which we must understand what is happening to Venezuela, to Africa, and to the global south today. Stay with us as we break them down to you. Our word of the day this week is hyper-imperialism. This isn't just old school colonialism dressed in Euro speak. It's a 21st century system of global domination where economic coercion, military force, and geopolitical leverage are fused into a single mechanism to subordinate sovereign nations for the benefits of empire. In 2025 to 2026, we have seen hyper-imperialism in action like never before. The United States, under the current administration, has escalated its pressure on Venezuela, from sanctions to military interventions, striking vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific, calling Venezuela's government a terrorist organization, and even seizing oil tankers. Washington then ordered a naval blockade on Venezuelan oil exports, moves that international legal experts and human rights bodies have condemned as illegal aggression and a violation of sovereignty. These actions are not about narcotics or democracy. They are about control. Venezuela possesses the largest proven oil reserves on earth. And when a nation like that refuses to bend to foreign interests, hyper-imperial powers turn economic warfare into kinetic force. The U.S. assault did not stop at economic strangulations. In January 2026, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was captured in a U.S. military operation. a dramatic escalation that amounted to a direct challenge to Venezuela's sovereignty and a blatant return to the 19th century empire tactics under modern pretext. This is hyper-imperialism, turning sanctions into blockades, turning competition into naval dominance, turning anti-drug oppression into regime change, declaring sovereign governments illegitimate while installing pilot proxies. And make no mistake, this drive is global. Hyper-imperialism is at work in Africa's death traps, in militarization of the Sahel, in foreign exploitative partnership, extracting minerals and keeping wealth out of local hands, and in geopolitical rivalry with China and other powers. This system doesn't just seek resources, it seeks political obedience and economic dependency. For oppressed people everywhere, our struggles are not isolated. The same forces that choked Venezuelan oil, that patrol the Sahel, that impose structural adjustment programs on African economies are expressions of the same hyper-imperialist matrix. So understanding hyper-imperialism means seeing that contemporary domination isn't subtle, it's systemic, violent, and deeply global. This is the word of the day on African Speaks. My name is Victoria Wilson, and the fight against imperialism is the fight for true sovereignty guided in solidarity and collective liberation. And to fully understand the present, we have to confront history. In our final segment, we look at roots of the aggression against Venezuela, from resource control and Cold War legacies to contemporary regime change politics. This history is not distant or abstract. It mirrors Africans' own experiences and explains why resistance continues despite the cost.
I'm talking from Caracas, Venezuela, a city who was attacked recently by the US military. And what I wanted to explain to you is how this situation started. In fact, the aggression of the US against Venezuela started from the very beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution. Commander Chavez won elections in 1998. He was inaugurated in 1999, and he started changing the constitution, changing the laws in Venezuela, and tried to do radical things to refound the republic. That was the words used by Chavez, the refoundation of the republic. In 2001, something very important happened, is that some laws were sanctioned. And one of those was the hydrocarbons law. The hydrocarbons law established a different scheme in the way we were going to manage our resources, particularly oil and gas. And something important is that, for example, to have an idea, the shareholding of the companies, in the oil companies, rose from 30% to 60%. The royalties the companies pay to Venezuela were 1%, and after the sanction of the law, it was elevated to 33%. That's something that the Americans didn't like, and they start attacking the government of Chavez. In fact, in 2002, they planned a coup d'etat. Chavez was kidnapped for 48 hours, but loyal army and the people on the street released Chavez, and Chavez started again. But from that point, we had lived a series of aggressions, of attacks, of different forms of war. We call it hybrid war, from the attacking the economy, attacking the supplies, attacking our trade with the other countries, our relation with other countries. Chavez expanded the relations, we never stopped selling oil to the United States. We never stopped selling oil to them. They stopped buying the oil. They stopped attacking us in that way. We had to say that in 2000, after the death of Commander Chavez, probably the US thought, okay, that will be the end of the revolution. That will be the end. So they intensified the attacks, but they couldn't do anything. I mean, President Maduro was elected president, and the revolution went on, even strengthening popular power, etc. But then Obama came, and Obama signed a decree that declared Venezuela an extraordinary threat to the American security. That's amazing. We are extraordinary threat to the United States, the country with the most powerful army in the world, the more deadly army in the world, declared we were a threat to them. And that decree was the base to establish sanctions, what they call sanctions, that basically illegal, coercive, unilateral measures. They are completely illegal because no country in the world can sanction another. It's only the United Nations, the platform, that can do that. So they impose coercive measures against us, mainly on the oil company, and try to make very difficult for us to explore, to trade oil to other countries. What happened with that is that 99% of national budget was eliminated. I mean, if we had $100, we had $1 only to do the same things, all the social programs, all the normal things we have to do in the country. It was very difficult. And in 2017, they organized what we call guarimbas. Guarimbas was a sort of demonstration, very violent, from the opposition, from people who were, later it was known that they were paid for that. They closed a street, for example, and they were very, very violent, and they killed people. They even burned alive someone because this guy looked like a Chavista. That was the word they used. This guy, a poor young man who was burned, stabbed, and burned alive, because he looked like a Chavista, means he was a black person. So this opposition is very violent, it's very racist, it's very classist, it's fascist, basically. That was 2017. 2019, they tried to, using the word humanitarian aid, they tried to cross the border from Colombia to Venezuela and try to make our army to revolt against the government. They couldn't do that. Something that they have tried since then is to divide, to break the loyalty of the army, and they had not been able to do that. Our army is very united, is very loyal to the government, to the constitution, and to the government. So they haven't been able to do that. They have tried to buy officials, to offer visas, a good life in the United States, money, etc. They haven't been able to buy any important officials in the army. In 2019 was the Guaidó thing. Guaidó was a deputy of the National Assembly. Nobody knows him, and he stand in a square and proclaim himself president. And the United States recognized him as a president. And that was the strategy to stall our assets abroad. For example, one of our main refineries is in the United States. It's called Citgo. And half the fuel we refined was there. It was very important company for us. And they just stole that company. Stole the company. They are now, they gave the company to the opposition of Venezuela, who stole the money, very corrupted opposition. So we lost that company. We lost an important asset abroad. And what happened then is that Trump came, and Trump said he was going to intensify the aggression. He said, "I want that oil." He said that. He's not talking about human rights, democracy. No, he said, "I want that oil," and he was angry with Biden because he said that Biden was making trade with us, and that was unfair for the United States. Recently, Trump even said the oil belonged to the United States. The oil and the land of Venezuela belong to them. He's out of everything. This is crazy. So the fact is that they impose sanctions, they impose economic war, devaluating the currency. In 2019, the devaluation of our currency was 170,000%. Imagine that, 170,000% devaluation because of the war. They said socialism is not doing well. You know, they are imposing us sanctions, they are attacking us, so we're doing the best we can. And the government has done the best, you know, providing food, the production, the agriculture improved with that. And we now, the food we consume is mostly produced in the country, not imported. And that was important, was accomplished because the popular organization, people's organization, that was very important. So peasants are organized, people from the communities are organized, so the production goes to the communities distribute the food, and that is very strong for us, that keep people united and people organized. And that's something that the Americans cannot understand. We have strength here because of the organization. And part of the thing with the oil, which is the center of the problem, is that with the law of the hydrocarbons, companies in the world can come here and make business. No problem with that. They can come here and make business, but there is some conditions. If a company come here, has to join or make a joint company with the Venezuelan company, in which the Venezuelan company have majority of share. And 40 companies came. 40 companies, Americans, British, French, Chinese, Vietnamese, Brazilians, came to Venezuela under those conditions without any problem. So we're producing oil, we're selling oil, no problem. ExxonMobil refused to do that. ExxonMobil left the country and sued us because they were losing money. They lost the process, but ExxonMobil has become an enemy of us. Even now, President Trump make a meeting with oil companies and ask them to come here, because now they can, because Trump said, which is not true, he said he's controlling everything. And the same companies said, well, we left Venezuela because you asked us to do that. He asked a CEO of Halliburton, why did you leave Venezuela? And the CEO said, well, you asked us to do that. we wanted to stay there, and you asked us to leave that. He was, no word from Trump about that. No? So the situation is that the U.S. Using all these sanctions, using all these coercive measures, couldn't divide the government, couldn't produce the regime change. The people kept with the government, organized, and the army is still united. So they have only one thing to do: attacking the country military. This is the last resource. But they know they can have control of the country. They know they can land the country because there will be a long and very costly war for them. Because the organization here, because the strength of our army, in terms of principles, in terms of patriotism, in terms of how united it is. So they make this attack, was very strong. We have to admit, was a very unequal combat. It's not true that we didn't do anything. We did what we could with what we have. They used very sophisticated technological devices that make us blind and silent all the raiders. There was something that they haven't used before. And they make us blind, and they use 150 aircraft to do that. 150. To make I don't like this comparison, but in the war in Iran last year, the 12 days war, they used 110 aircraft. They use 150 here in Venezuela. They use very highly sophisticated missiles, even unnecessary for the target. So they destroy an antenna in the Venezuelan Scientific Institute. They destroy an antenna there, a communication antenna, with a missile that was completely unnecessary, was a disproportionate power, use that. But this destruction of this antenna have a message. It's saying, this is what we have. This is what we are going to do to you. Because the destruction of the antenna destroyed the center of mathematics, and the antenna was very near a nuclear reactor. That could be a disaster in Venezuela. So they just threaten us, saying that we have, and we can do that, and we can use it again. So now, the situation now is that, contrary to that, people said, our government is still there. It's the same government, it's the Bolivarian government, the same minister, the same institution. We are in power. And we're trying to continue all the programs that we had last year. For example, last year we could produce 1.1 million barrels of oil. So that was raising our production. That was last year with specific schemes called productive participation contracts. So a new thing that Nicolás Maduro introduced to make trade, to make business with oil companies, and we could have a good production and even a good economic growth. 8.5% economic growth Venezuela last year, which is one of the highest in Latin America. So it doesn't seem that the socialism is failing. We are doing our best. But now we have to admit we are in a difficult time. We have negotiating with a gangster who is pointing a gun at our head. That's the situation. And our comrades, our people have to understand that we are in a very difficult moment, trying to give time and try to do our best under very unequal conditions, we think now is more than ever time for the people of the world, because the United Nations is proving to be, to fail. And the Americans and the American imperialism is now crazy, threatening the world, and the only thing they had is the guns, the force, and they are trying to impose a world in which force is the important thing, not dialogue, not diplomatic, no, force. And so I think the most important thing is first to understand the condition we are now, not to think it's not true that there was a betrayal or internal thing. It's not true. The government is very united, very loyal to Nicolas Maduro, who is still our president by law. He's the constitutional president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And Delcy Rodriguez is the acting president. She's still the vice president and is acting president because our president has been kidnapped. That's the truth. He was not captured. He was kidnapped in a war scenario. Who is a prisoner of war. That's how we see that and what we want to tell the people. We defended ourselves in the way we could. Our president was kidnapped, but our government is still there, united, and trying to do the best in very unequal conditions.
And that brings us to the end of today's edition of Africa Speaks right here on Pan-African Television. We examined U.S. aggression against Venezuela, heard from comrades and movements, and named the system behind it, Hyper-Imperialism. As we begin a new year, one thing is clear. The struggle for sovereignty is global, and solidarity remains our strongest weapon. So until next time, keep questioning power, keep organizing, and remember, Africa must speak and Africa must be heard. My name is Victoria Wilson. Do have a lovely evening.